Best in Blue.
Connecting you, the listener, to the everyday inner workings of the Memphis Police Department.
Best in Blue on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
You're listening to the Best in Blue right here on the KUDZUKIAN Network. I'm DC, one of the hosts of this wonderful program, sitting alongside my very, very knowledgeable host, and that is Leah Romer. Leah, how are you today?
I'm doing fine, thank you, sir. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Well, it's always a pleasure to bring the Best in Blue show to our communities around the world, because we are podcasting here, right? So let's talk about this one thing. Today, we are going to have the opportunity to talk to one of Memphis's finest about a very sensitive subject, one that we know affects communities all across not only our country but the world, and that's domestic violence.
Yes, and it affects families. It could be your mom, it could be your sister, your brother. We're all impacted in some way. Maybe you grew up and witnessed domestic violence.
Sure, as I did. Yes, I did. And I think this show today, and we're going to have on Major J.D. Smith, who happens to be the commander of the Domestic Violence Bureau with the Memphis Police Department, and he's going to walk us through the work that they do there on a day-to-day basis, and also give us some helpful tips to our listeners who may either be facing some domestic violence situations, or who you may know some people that you can also help bring some resources to them, right, Leah?
Yes, being able to talk about resources and connect people with those resources,
yes.
Being able to talk about safety planning, and also just identifying what is domestic violence.
Exactly. Make sure you stick around. We're going to have a great show today with our very own Major J.D. Smith of the Memphis Police Department as we talk about the domestic violence issues that we're having right here in our own communities. And also, you know what? Make sure to check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, or your favorite podcast provider. There's a new way also you can get instant access to our latest episodes. Just text BNB. That's right, folks, BNB to 72000 72000 right here on Best in Blue on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
Best in Blue. Let's get connected.
Neighborhood Connect.
A renowned author, Mr. Preston Lauterbach.
Welcome.
Thank you. I never get tired of the word renowned. That works.
You are certainly renowned on some of the things that have happened in this community, and so we're glad to have you on the show today.
Well, it's a healthy addiction, I think.
Neighborhood Connect.
Neighborhood Connect.
Here at KUDZUKIAN. Best in Blue.
Hi, this is Lee Recruiter with the Memphis Police Department, Officer Kevin Moore. Join the Best in Blue. Our requirements are achievable. Our standards are the highest. Our officers are the finest. We are the Best in Blue. Join MPD.com.
Best in Blue.
Hey, I'm Major J.D. Smith with the Memphis Police Department's Domestic Violence Bureau, and you're listening to the Best in Blue on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
You're listening to the Best in Blue right here on the KUDZUKIAN Network. I'm DC, one of the hosts of this program, sitting along with my Leah Romer. She's a great co-host. Hey, Leah, how are you?
Thank you, DC. How are you doing?
You know what? We've got a brand new edition of Best in Blue today, and we're going to be talking about a very sensitive subject, not only around our country, but here in our community especially. We're going to talk to Major J.D. Smith of the Memphis Police Department regarding the Domestic Violence Bureau and all of those things that make up their work within that bureau. Welcome to the Best in Blue, Major Smith. How are you, sir?
Fine. How are you doing this morning, DC?
Man, we hanging in there, Doc. We hanging in. We want, and Leah, we really want to make sure that people know that this is a dialogue, right?
Yes.
So this is an information piece, but it's a dialogue with Major Smith regarding such a sensitive subject.
Yes, and we're going to be talking about safety planning and domestic violence and all of the different factors when it comes to possibly leaving that sort of domestic violence situation. We just want all the listeners to know that we're not trying to blame anyone, and we understand that this is a very difficult subject, and we're hoping to be able to connect people with resources through this show.
That's right. So let's just jump right in there. Major Smith, Domestic Violence Bureau, your bureau that you command. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, the Domestic Violence Bureau is made up of 20 investigators, and 15 are general investigators. There are 3 elder abuse investigators, and there are 2 that work in what we call our GPS program, which is tracking. And we investigate all types of domestic violence situations, and we find that's imperative that we go the extra mile as far as domestic violence, due to the fact that we've seen a lot of fatalities as of lately.
Wow. Well, let me ask you this. Now define for us and our listeners what domestic violence really is. I mean, just as broad as you can be, but very specific about what domestic violence is, so our listeners can have an idea.
Well, domestic violence it entails cohabitants, intimate partner relationships, family members.
Oh, let me stop. And when you can, cohabitants. Tell us exactly what a cohabitant is, or those types of partnerships, so people will understand what that means to them.
Basically, roommates.
Okay.
Yeah, roommates are in a domestic situation. There, of course, in some instances, there are intimate partner relationships when they're roommates. But I say cohabitants, I mean roommates. Is exactly what I'm saying. Okay.
And when you're working in a domestic violence case, what is considered to not be a domestic violence relationship?
Where there are several types of non-domestic situations where there's rooming house type situations where they live under the same address but they're not involved in any type of relationship is one that comes to mind. Situations where let's see, there was another one on the tip of my tongue. I'll get back to that when I think of it. But a rooming house situation where people live in the same address but they're not involved in a particular relationship or not related.
Now you talked about cohabitants, and there were some other types of partnerships. I want to really stress that, if I can, Leah. I want to stress that to the listeners that there's certain types, right? Mm-hmm. So cohabitants was one, and there was a few others that you mentioned just a second ago.
Yeah, basically family.
Yeah.
Okay, that too is a domestic situation where a mother and daughter get into an argument, a fight results in a domestic situation. 2 brothers fighting, things along those lines. So family members also included.
And does your bureau handle stalking cases, and do you see a lot of stalking involved in harassment in domestic violence?
When it's DV-related stalking, we do handle those cases. And stalking is one of the precursors to a situation that's going to be possibly volatile, and harassment, DV, and things along those lines. It becomes a situation where those are all some of the signs that's going to lead to a domestic situation escalating possibly to a fatality situation.
Wow. Well, Leah, let me ask you this one quick question. If we can here encapsulate, I guess the brevity of the domestic violence in our area, in Memphis, would you say that the situations or the incidences have grown in number?
Well,
in our community.
Well, the thing is, what we have to understand is that more domestic violence cases are being reported. So we can't say that they've grown. Historically, domestic violence is one of the most underreported crimes in America. Wow. So with that being said, now that the cases are being reported, our numbers can be, can fluctuate. But, due to the fact that we've handled probably over 16, probably 17,000 cases a year, we can say
17,000 a year?
That's correct. Sometimes.
About how many calls do you think we're receiving that are domestic violence?
Well, we get about possibly about anywhere from 50 to 60 cases a day, and that's in the city of Memphis. The county has their own domestic violence bureau as well.
You're listening to The Best in Blue right here on the KUDZUKIAN Network. And I want to make sure that, and I want to take this very slow because it's such a sensitive subject, Major, and we want the listeners to be able to unpack this stuff and think and say, hey, look, if this is something that's occurring to me or a friend or a family member, we want to make sure we get good information out there. So we've got the cohabitants, we've got the partnerships. Now, has there been any particular group that you've seen, maybe the LGBT community, maybe the Hispanic community, maybe the African American community, where the numbers have been reported on a higher basis than on some others?
Well, based on the demographics in Memphis, we see more African Americans or blacks doing reporting, making reports. But historically, in my experience, in almost 24 years on the job, the Hispanic community doesn't make a lot of reports or file a lot of reports as far as domestic violence goes. They kind of keep it within their culture. So the message that I can give to those listeners is that, if it occurs, then you need to report it.
Yeah, sure.
So, we can discuss about how to get help
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute or two. Yeah,
without getting the police involved is a way to do that.
And you mentioned underreported earlier, and you talked just a little bit about that just now. Why do you think that domestic violence goes so underreported here in Memphis?
Well, the thing is, the victim at times feels shameful, that they're embarrassed. They don't want the police coming to the house. The neighbors see it. Sometimes it's cultural. A lot of times it's financial. So a lot of times, what we see is anywhere from 7 to 8 occurrences as far as domestic issues before they actually file a report, which is pretty bad, because that means that the offender has battered that victim at least 6 or 7 times, possibly before they actually file a report.
And you're saying, man, I tell you, and this is what I want to make sure we unpack for our listeners, to make sure that if it's possible, right, contact somebody, right? Contact the Memphis Police Department if it's possible, a church member or someone, to let them know that you're in this situation, if it at all is possible. I'm sure, right?
That's correct. And Leah and I spoke earlier before the broadcast about some of the resources that we have available to victims. And one of the things you bring up is key as far as getting out of the situation. That's letting someone know that you are having issues with your partner, but don't give that person any inkling that you're going to leave, because that person may be on social media. That person may be a talker, and the information get back to the batterer in that situation. Then we go through what we call the honeymoon phase. Everything's fine. All of a sudden, the batterer reoffends. So we have to be careful. And some of the things that resources we have available to victims is at the Family Safety Center, where you can call. You don't have to get the police involved.
Well, let me stop you right there, Major, because we're going to take a quick break right here. Let me tell you, we're going to be right back talking about the domestic violence unit here in our Memphis Police Department, and the work that they do every day to try to help eradicate this issue of domestic violence in our communities. We'll be right back, DC and Leah, with Major J.D. Smith right here on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
Best in Blue.
Artivism.
Artivism features conversations with artists, creatives, and citizens working at the intersection of art and social activism. And I'm Linda Steele, your host. I'm a grant maker, change maker, social venture capitalist, and I invest in individuals and projects that use the arts as a vehicle for social change.
Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
KUDZUKIAN.
Best in Blue.
We've got with us Lieutenant Tyrone Curry. Lieutenant, how are you, sir?
I'm very well.
So we'll teach them how to be good communicators.
The brainchild of our own police director right here in the city of Memphis.
On the KUDZUKIAN Network.
Hey, this is Colonel Sam Hines with MPD. You're listening to the Best in Blue, powered by the KUDZUKIAN Network.
Hey, we're back at you right here on Best in Blue on the KUDZUKIAN Network. I'm DC, sitting in with Leah Roma, and our guest in our studio today is we've got Major J.D. Smith of the Domestic Violence Bureau, and we're having a dialogue with Major Smith. And I tell you what, Major, welcome back. I can't say welcome enough, because what you do with the Domestic Violence Bureau and the issues that you all are wrestling with every day to keep our citizens safe is commendable. It's commendable, sir. It's commendable. I want you to know that, okay? It's commendable.
Thank you, DC.
Major Smith, you started to get into possible reasons of why a victim might stay, or as she's trying to plan her process to leave. And you said that on average a victim may go through 7 or 8 instances before they make that move to leave. Can you kind of explain to us why that might be?
Well, the thing is, and what we've experienced in domestic violence cases is that sometimes it's painful, they're shameful, there's financial reasons, there's kids involved, and the offender is so controlling that they have an emotional hold on the victim. And what I experienced in the past is seen situations where the victims do not have an escape. They don't have a way to get out of that situation. And some of the things and resources that we have available today in the Family Safety Center is we offer planning as far as how to get out, resources such as housing that we can keep victims safe for 2 years if necessary.
Wow.
And where in
That's
the
wonderful.
past, it's just unbelievable.
That's wonderful.
And our shelters in days of past were considered open bay type shelters. Now we have hotel apartment type accommodations will allow our victims to stay, somewhat upward of over a year or so. A lot of good resources. But to answer your question, Leo, the reason why I feel the victims wait 7 to 8 instances before they actually report it and go through as far as prosecution goes is because the victim is constantly victimized daily.
Yeah.
So the emotional hold is strong. Yeah. So, and they are always hopeful and wishing that the offender will never do it again. Because that's exactly what the offender tells them. It won't happen again.
Let me stop you right there. And that goes to unhealthy relationships, right? So let's talk a little bit about some signs of unhealthy relationships with our intimate partners that end up becoming a domestic violence situation that brings the police department in. Mm-hmm. Can we talk a little bit about that?
We can. Some of the things, like I said, I experienced with that type of unhealthy relationships you're referring to is when the offender or the batterer is controlling, they're extremely jealous, there's stalking type behavior going on. Things along those lines are going to result more than likely in a domestic abuse situation, which sometimes the victims feel as if they're loved and they're cared about because the victim is so jealous and they think it's cute. I hate to use that word, but they do.
That's right.
It's very embarrassing where a victim has to say, this guy, I love him. He follows me a lot. He checks my phone as soon as I get home and things along those lines. But those are some of the signs that you're in a domestic abuse situation that's going to potentially become volatile.
And that reminds us a little bit about what you mentioned earlier, the pattern of violence. Can you elaborate a little bit about that?
Yeah, without using specific terms, what we say in DV is, okay, they're back in the honeymoon phase where everything is blissful.
Yeah.
Let me buy you roses, let me take you to dinner.
Yeah.
I'll buy you that necklace you wanted.
Yeah, forget about all that other stuff I just did a while ago.
Exactly. So they're buying time before they reoffend is what's happening. And what we see regularly is that, they go through that phase and the victim is happy for a brief moment. Oh, he's not going to do it again. He took me skiing for the weekend or something along those lines. Next thing you know, one instance and then, displaced anger by the batterer, and they're back in the old situation they were in before.
You're listening to The Best in Blue right here on the KUDZUKIAN Network. Leah?
And so you mentioned lethality assessment earlier, and that made me think of when the victim is trying to leave, and you guys are trying to gauge how dangerous the situation is. Mm-hmm. What are some of the questions that you all ask in the lethality assessment?
We ask, has the batterer or offender threatened to kill you in the past? Does he have access to a weapon? Small, what we think to be simple questions are extremely important as far as assessing the lethality situation as far as the victim's danger or possibly becoming a victim of domestic violence.
Let me stop you right there, Major. Now this lethality assessment is conducted when and how is it and who conducts this lethality assessment? Can you give our listeners just a little bit of information on that?
We just completed the 9th precinct, which is all of our precincts involved now, in what we call the LAP, which is the Lethality Assessment Program. And what happens is, first of all, the program only involves intimate partners, which can possibly be, same-sex couples and same-sex couples and heterosexual couples as well. But what happens is the officer make the scene. They determine that there is possibly a situation where domestic violence has occurred, and they pull the victim aside and they talk to the victim and ask them a series of questions on this questionnaire that's pre-prepared, and they screen in what we call, and they meet the threshold as far as being possibly in a lethality of a lethal situation. Then the officer takes the victim to a place of safety, and it's a hotel or apartment type accommodation. And the victim the next day is taken to the Family Safety Center for additional resources as far as planning, like you talked about, Leah, and what I call escape planning, to get themselves out of that situation.
Well, can I ask you, let me follow up with this one. So that officer on the scene, he made the scene, but that necessarily wasn't your investigator, right? Or was it your investigator that conducted that lethality assessment?
No, that's just the uniformed patrol officer.
I got you.
But it's basically what we're doing with the program. The intent is to have that early intervention. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because a lot of times what we find is in domestic violence situations that, they'll call, and they'll say, hey, yes, I've been beaten. But when officers get there, it's a scare tactic. They refuse to report. They refuse. They see the batterer being taken into custody. And at that time, they recant some things, and so that's when we separate the two and pull them aside and say, "Hey, you do have some options here," And they make a call to an advocate at the Family Safety Center, 24 hours a day, and they say, "Hey, listen, these are some of the things we offer you tomorrow. Come in and see us, so we can get you out of the situation. If you're a wife who doesn't work, then we have financial planning and things that you can do to get yourself out of the situation."
Sure.
So,
Wow.
I think it's a fantastic resource. I think it's
sir,
working
I think you're
really
absolutely
well
right.
this time.
And sometimes when you're taking the victim to shelter, do you guys decide that maybe the victim might need to get an order of protection, or is that something that the shelter decides or refers them to?
Well, right now, the Family Safety Center is they do order protections from hours of 8 to 4. And we're currently in the process of working on getting order protections available, what we call on-site order protections, where we can take victims to different.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's been in the planning process for quite a while, but we're still working on that. Like I said, we got a meeting this week coming up. But the thing is, we can offer that option here shortly, before long, but during the business hours, yes, that is an option that they can use to get the order protection.
And what exactly, for listeners, is an order of protection? I mean, we hear restraining order, but those are different, aren't they?
They are. But the on-site order of protection, the order of protection is without going into extreme detail, it bars the offender from contacting and being in certain areas where the victim is, because they know each other's schedule, things along those lines.
Sure.
So it restricts the movement of the offender as far as being close to the victim, things along those lines. That's just a general overview. But we also have the GPS program, which is widely used in order protection situations, where the bad guy or offender has an exclusion zone. In other words, they're not to go in certain areas where they know the victim is going to be.
Let me stop you right there, Major, because I want to come back to those resources that you all deploy to help those who have been battered to stay safer in some fashion. So you're listening to The Best in Blue right here on the KUDZUKIAN Network, and we are dialoguing with Major J.D. Smith of the Memphis Police Department's Domestic Violence Bureau.
Best in Blue.
Best in Blue.
That means we go to the schools, we go to the churches, we do all types of programs to try to build the relationship between law enforcement and the community.
Best in Blue on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
KUDZUKIAN.
We're getting funky, y'all.
And we have to thank Dick Durbin for being strong enough to actually come out of the Oval Office and say, hey, by the way.
Because he didn't have to say it, did he?
He didn't have to say it,
and I appreciate it.
Because I tell people all the time, just because you skin folk don't mean you kin folk.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Just because you skin folk, you ain't got to be kin folk.
It's Funky Politics on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
KUDZUKIAN.
Best in Blue.
You're back with us right here on the Best in Blue on the KUDZUKIAN Network. DC and Leah sitting in talking to, we're not talking, we're having a dialogue with Major J.D. Smith of the Domestic Violence Bureau. And we were just talking a minute ago, Major Smith, about the GPS tracking system when it comes to abusers. Can we talk a little bit more about that and how that technology you all use to help keep these victims safe?
Yes. We're currently using a GPS program where when the abuser or offender is arrested, upon their bail conditions, a ankle bracelet of sorts is placed on the offender, and that person is made aware that there are exclusion zones where they're not to go in the instance where they could possibly encounter the victim.
Like work and church and things like that.
Right.
In communities.
Dropping the kids off
Sure.
at school, things like that, because they know each other's schedule. So it's a situation where, we don't want the abuser or offender to know or get in the area. Sometimes there's small exclusion zones where the victim could possibly be, go in public places.
Sure.
Where more than likely we will not violate the offender, and get a warrant for their arrest. But there's also bigger exclusion zones where they know that the victim is going to drop the kids off at school and they're sitting across the street stalking along those lines. The victim is given, in the past there's been misinformation about the victim giving an ankle bracelet as well. That's not the case. They're giving a small transmitter that's smaller than a cell phone.
And I think you're right. I've heard something about that, and I think, social media can take some things and run with it, and half of it, it's kind of like some of it is actually fake news, but Please reiterate that how that is not true. That you ankle bracelet a victim.
That is not true. Absolutely not true. That the victim is given a small transmitter, which can be placed in their purse, in their pockets.
Yeah.
Right. So, and that is so the GPS detective or sergeant who's monitoring that device can tell whether or not they're moving in proximity of the offender.
In harm's way.
Right. And I'm sorry, go ahead, Leah.
Are you finding a lot of success with this program and a lot of willing participants and that sort of thing?
We've had up to this point well over 1,000 participants in the program.
Wow.
Some willingly, and some other. I mean,
that's 1,000 too many, right? That's just 1,000 too many.
Right. I didn't bring the stats with me, but
that's
we have over
enough.
1,000 cases that we've used the GPS program, and it's been highly successful in a sense where we can also track these offenders. They don't just commit domestic violence; they commit other crimes as well.
Sure.
So we use what we call a crime correlation. Is what we're currently checking into, and we see that some of these offenders are wearing these GPS devices, and there's a robbery within 50 feet. Then that gives the investigator who handles that robbery a little more information to say, hey, this could possibly be my bad guy.
Yeah.
Show a photo spread, pick him out, then we've won in two different ways at that time. So, but the GPS program at this point has been highly successful, and it's really a useful tool as far as keeping the offender away from the victim.
And this is a 24-hour monitored or attached thing to some real-time crime, somewhere where somebody can see this.
That's correct. And our GPS unit is housed in a real-time crime center.
Great.
And
Great.
They use the correlation to find out whether or not the offender has violated the exclusion zone. If so, in some instances where they violate the exclusion zone, and we need to find out why and how, and if it's very well possible that was a mistake, then the investigator at that time in GPS will not issue a warrant. However, if the offender lets the battery go dead, they didn't charge the device like they're supposed to, then a warrant will be issued.
As you're working with these offenders and really realizing who's the abuser and who's not, do you ever see a situation where the abuser has multiple victims or the abuser has moved on to a different victim? Do you see that a lot?
We do. And when the investigator gets the case, we have to find out who we're dealing with. Mm-hmm. So the first thing we do is to check the history between the two individuals. Then we check individual histories. What we've seen in several instances is that this particular time, he's a victim or she's a victim. The next time, they'll be a suspect. So there's a pattern of domestic violence that involves a lot of cases. But some of these bad guys, like you say, they have several girlfriends and they beat all of them. Mm-hmm. So they single out a particular type of individual, and they seek those type of individuals, and they find out that they can control them and beat them up several times before they call the police, take things from them, steal from them and things along those lines, and control them emotionally and all those different things.
That's getting back to those unhealthy relationships we talked about previously. How can, and I want our listeners to know this from you as being the commander, and you see it on a day-to-day basis, what are some of the tips that you can give to the just average citizens who's not going through a domestic violence but may know of someone who is? What can they do, Major, to help this person who is battered, who may not be strong enough at this point to report? What can they do, or to leave?
Do you see that? That's a deep one.
I know it's $1 million question, but what is there anything?
Well, the thing is, first of all, if you are a victim of domestic violence, you have to make someone aware of it.
Yeah.
Okay, and not by putting glasses or wearing shades because you have a black eye. That's too late. Let someone know that you're a victim, for one. The second part of it is use the resources that are available to you. And that means that if you have church groups, you have counseling, things along those lines, then possibly invite the offender, take the offender to counseling.
Yeah.
I would say, or ultimately use my favorite resource is the Family Safety Center, which you don't have to involve the police. You can simply go there and use those resources. And they will assist you in things such as financial planning, what I call emergency escape situations. A lot of times, the victims are, in the heat of the moment, they're not prepared. They leave with the clothes they have on their back, and that's it.
Yeah.
You have the kids to pack up and things along those lines. You should have a bag placed somewhere strategic just in case you have to leave. And it has the things that are necessary. I mean, your medication, your kids' medication, a change of clothes, for the kids. Right. Yeah. But the Family Safety Center has diapers. They have items for women that are,
so they've got the toiletry. They've got everything there in case you just come there with a robe on. Mm-hmm. This Family Safety Center. And you got a number on the Family Safety Center?
Yeah, 222-4400.
222-4400 is a phone number to the Family Safety Center.
Right, and there's unbelievable resources there, and they help so many people every single day.
How important is safety planning when you're trying to make that decision if it's safe enough for you to get out of the situation? Is that a checklist you follow, or is that plan always changing?
Well, I mean, in a domestic situation, you have to be fluid because the situation could change, literally in seconds. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to getting out of that situation, when you plan to leave, that is the most dangerous moment because the offender knows at that time he or she is losing control. At that moment, they want to savor that situation, they want to fix it, and they may go back to the honeymoon phase, they start buying things, or they may lash out. Mm-hmm. At that time, what we've seen in the past is that the victim, I was planning to leave, and that's when we see, an extremely volatile situation occur. Mm-hmm. So some of the planning can be pre-planned for months, maybe a year, you never know.
Sure.
Because a lot of times what we've seen as of lately, a lot of the victims, they don't work. So if that is the case, then financial planning is key.
That's right.
And I've seen the Family Safety Center advise several different ways on how to handle those things. A lot of times the offender doesn't want the victim to work because it is a controlling situation. And it's financial abuse is happening where he gives the victim $5 to put gas in a Suburban. You can only go so far.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's a controlling situation. But to answer your question, Leah, what we've experienced, the most dangerous time to get out of a situation is when you plan to leave. Mm-hmm. That's the reason why the offender shouldn't know. You shouldn't tip him off. You shouldn't tell his sister, I'm going to leave him. At that time, it becomes extremely volatile.
You mentioned a tip of what not to do. Do you have any other tips of things that you should stay away from doing?
Yeah, posting stuff on social media about your relationship, embarrassing or shaming this individual who is extremely prideful and being
and volatile, no doubt.
Yeah, exactly. This person is very volatile. If you know that, then at that time you should do everything you could to make this person feel, to support his ego or her ego.
Yeah. Especially
safe.
when you're in the planning phase, right?
Right, yeah. Right. You have to be discreet. You have to be extremely secretive on who you tell, and all of a sudden the offender, he or she comes home and you're just not there. You and the kids have packed up, you've moved on. We have a victim now that's been in our one of our shelters for well over 90 days.
Wow.
She was a single parent with kids with no planning, no financial means to do anything. But we've taken her cell phone and replaced it with something else so she can communicate with family members. Yeah. But that's too is dangerous. Because you have family members, sometimes they
who are
know
still linked to that particular abuser, right?
Yeah, some of them like them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's right.
So this
we don't even want to get into that. But relationships, building, and he or she was smart in building key relationships with your family members, and guess what? They've got them on their side now, so to speak. Well, no, he couldn't have done that.
Right.
And even though they're your family member.
Right. But one of the first things that the batterer, offender, or abuser does is to isolate the victim.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Separate them from family members and people that love them. So that way,
so he can or she can be in control of the situation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you know what, Major, let me tell you something. We have enjoyed you being with us today. This dialogue hopefully has meant something to our community, and it's meant something to us because you've opened up our eyes to this thing called domestic violence and what it has done in our communities to families, on both sides, right?
On both sides, oh yeah.
To families on both sides. And Leah and I appreciate you being here on the Best in Blue with us. We want you to come back. We want you to come back when you've got time to unfold some healthy statistics, hopefully.
Right.
That those numbers are actually going down for a change.
Okay.
And for those that are listening that might be suffering in silence, what are some words of encouragement that you would provide for them?
There's always a way out. And how and when you start your planning process is going to be key to your success. Mm-hmm. And once again, DC put the number out there. You don't have to get the police involved. You can always make contact with the Family Safety Center to get yourself out of the situation without getting us involved. And the reason why that's important and key, I'll be brief, is because what we've experienced also in the Domestic Violence Bureau is when when the investigator calls and the victim answers the phone, a lot of times the offender is in their presence.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Wow.
If it's a male officer, of course, they say, hey, this is Sergeant such and such from Domestic Violence Bureau. Then the offender knows, okay, you've called the police on me. Now we have an issue. You see, so that situation where they may be en route to dinner, it's a U-turn, it's back to the house, and let me go ahead and
back to another session, so to speak.
Exactly.
222-4400.
That's correct.
222-4400. The Family Safety Center. Thank you for your service, Major J.D. Smith, and what you all do every day to keep our citizens safe right here in the city of Memphis. Okay?
Thank you.
Right
Thank
on the
you
Best
so
in
much.
Blue on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
This is Lee Recruiter with the Memphis Police Department, Officer Kevin Moore. Join the Best in Blue. Our requirements are achievable. Our standards are the highest. Our officers are the finest. We are the Best in Blue. Join MPD.com.
Best in Blue.
Riffin' on Jazz.
I'm Howard Robertson, one of your hosts for Riffin' on Jazz. Riffin' is your weekly visit with friends where we dive all in to that classic African-American art form called jazz. So don't miss Riffin' with me and my man Melvin Massey every week on your favorite broadcast and podcast platforms.
Riffin' on Jazz on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
Hey DC, we've had a very important and impactful conversation on domestic violence and all of the possible different resources and safety planning when it comes to maybe getting out of one of those kinds of situations.
I agree with you completely.
We've talked about what domestic violence is. How can you identify whether a relationship is unhealthy or healthy? We've also talked about the domestic violence unit and what they do on a daily basis and the kinds of services that they offer victims of domestic violence on a daily basis. Man, he said there were just thousands of calls per year, and they handle about 50 to 60 cases per day. That's such a volume for Memphis.
That's amazing. And then this Family Safety Center, he kept talking about the importance of the Family Safety Center at 222-4400, y'all. The number is 222-4400. And one of the major things that I heard, Major Smith say, and that was, let someone know. Just notify someone that you're in distress, right, Leah? Let someone know something.
Yes, definitely when you're starting to plan your safety exit, being able to talk to someone that you trust and care about and letting them know that, hey, I might need help and this situation is possibly going on and I need to start planning for my safety for myself and maybe for my children and the rest of my family. So make sure to check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, or your favorite podcast provider. There's a new way to get instant access to our latest episodes. Just text B&B to 72000. That's right, just text B&B to 72000.
Best in Blue right here on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
Best in Blue on the KUDZUKIAN Network.